Hi everybody. This video will show how you can easily create a summary report from different workbooks using Excel VBA. So our goal for this video is to create a summary report like this. This information is from different workbooks. We have one workbook that contains the customer name. Another workbook contains the customer company details, and another has the customer contact information. All three workbooks contain a primary reference key, the ID number column. So in our primary tool, we only have the ID number details. Later, we will create a procedure to select a file, and after choosing a file, VBA will look up and copy all the available information and paste it into our primary tool. If you notice, the data from each workbook are not in order based on the ID number. And later in the code, we will cover that. So let's start writing the VBA code for this project. Open VBA editor, insert a new module. I will name this module report, and then create a new procedure. I will name it create summary report. And let's use an option explicit as an excellent practice to restrict us from using a variable without declaring them first. In our procedure, we will declare a workbook variable that will represent the tool. I will name it main WB or main workbook. It should be of a workbook type. And we will set this variable equals to this workbook. We will also declare a worksheet variable that will represent the report worksheet. I will name the variable report sh as a worksheet, and we will set the variable using the worksheet name. So let's use the keyword set, the variable name, and then we will access the workbook variable, which is the main WB, and then we will use the worksheet name, which is the report. I will just add comment here, and this is the report worksheet. Before we can look up the data, we need to open the file first. And before we can open the file, we need to know the file path first. So let's declare a variable for the file path. I will name the variable file path, and it should be of type string. And we will set the value of this variable equals to the function application that get open file name, and this function will open a dialog where we can select an Excel file, and after we select a file, VBA will capture the path of that file. After getting the path of the target file, let's declare another workbook variable that will represent the file we selected. I will name the variable data workbook, and it should be of a workbook type. I will just add a comment that this is the selected Excel file, and then we will set the variable using the workbooks that open function, and then we will indicate the path of the file, which is our file path variable. Before we proceed further, let us test this code first. So I will click the run button and then select the customer name file. And here you can see that when the workbooks that open code executed, it opened the selected file, which is this. I will just minimize this first. And I will use this file as reference for writing the additional code. So let's declare a worksheet variable that will represent the file worksheet. So I will just name the variable data sh or data sheet, and it is a worksheet variable type. And then we will set that variable using the worksheet index. But first, we need to access the variable that represents this workbook. And in that case, that is our data WB variable. And then we will use that sheets. And again, instead of using the worksheet name, we will use the worksheet index number. So we will assume that the file always contain one worksheet. So we can use the index of 1. I will also put a comment here. All right. It is an excellent practice to include a validation before the actual data lookup. So we must validate if the file has the reference column or the ID number. So I will add a comment here that uh, validate if the file contains the reference column. And for that, we will declare a Boolean variable for the validation result, and I will just name it dim rep column found. It should be of Boolean type, and we will set the initial value of that variable equals to false. So rep column found is equals to false, and we will also declare a variable that will hold the column index of the reference column if found. And we will name that variable dim rep column index, and it should be of type integer. I will just add more space here in my editor. And next is we need to create a loop for the file column names. So we will be looping into the column name of this file so we can check if the ID number column exists within this file. So I will add a comment again that this is a loop for the file column names. And before we start the loop, we will get the last column index number first of the selected file. So we will declare a variable that will represent the file last column number. I will just name that file last column, and I will use long as the variable type. And we will set the variable using the columns that count function. So to do that, let's first write the variable name, and it will be equals to data sh. Again, data sh represent this worksheet, and then we'll use that cells. And for the row index, the column names is in row number 1, so we will use 1. For the column index, we will use columns that count, and then we will be using that end Excel to left that column. So this is how you can get the last column index or column index with value in a specific row. So if we execute this code, this will return as 3 because the last column index with value in this row is column number 3. And then we will declare a loop counter variable, and I will just name it a, and it should be of type integer. So this will be our counter loop for the file columns. And now we can write the for loop and assign 1 as the initial value of the counter variable, and the loop is until the file last column number, which is our file last call variable. And then next a. And here in the loop, we need to validate each column if the value equals the ID number. So to do that, we will use an if condition. If data sh that cells, because we know that the column is in row number 1, we will use 1 for the row index. And for the column index, we will use the loop counter variable, which is a. and then that value. So that value will return as the text within that cell, and then we will check if it is equals to ID number, then and if. So if the value of the column we are checking is equals to ID number, then we will assign the value true on the validation result variable, and that is our rep column found variable. We will set that to true, and we will also set the reference column index equal to the matching column index, which is our counter variable, which is A. And if the column match, we need to add an exit for to stop the for loop. And after the for loop, if the validation is successful, we will use the if condition again to check that, and the validation result variable, which is rep column found. If that is equals to true, then we will continue with the data lookup. If not, we will show a message box indicating that the file selected is invalid because reference column is not found. And I will use a BB critical icon and an OK only button for that message, and just use report for the message box title. If the reference column is found, first we need to check if the target data column exists in the file. I will add a comment, exists in the file. So we will create a loop first in the report worksheet because this worksheet contains the column name that we need to search. So I will add a comment for that. And before we create the loop, we need to declare a variable for the report worksheet last column number. Oops. I will name the variable report last call, and it will be of type long. And then again, similar to what we did earlier for the file last column number, we will set this variable equals to this time report sh, because that is the variable that reference the report worksheet. And then in our tool, the the row number where the column index are located is row number 2. So for the row index, we will use 2. And then for the column index, again, we will use the columns that count and that end Excel to left that column. So for our primary tool, this should return as 13. Well, actually, we can test that using the immediate window. I will press Ctrl G, and then let me just adjust this. I will copy this part of the code, and then using a question mark, I will paste that code here in the immediate window, and here you can see that it returns 13. So then I know that the last column number for my primary tool is 13. Let's go back to VBA editor. Now we can write the for loop, and we will use again the counter variable name A, and we will set the initial value of the counter equals to 2, because the first column we need to look up is in column index number 2. And the loop should be until the report worksheet's column number, and that is our report last column variable. Then next A. And next, we will create another loop in the target file's worksheet column names. So first, let's declare a new loop counter variable. I will just name it B. It should be of type integer, and this will be the counter loop for the file columns. And then we will write the for loop and set the counter variable initial value to 1 because we want to assume that the column A might not be containing ID number all of the time. So we can make this flexible if you have a different sample data. And then the loop should be until the file last column number. And we already have a variable that represent that. That is our file last column variable. So we can just use that in this for loop to file last call. And then next B. I will just add a comment here that this is a loop for the file column names. And the first one is the loop for the report column names. All right. So inside this for loop, we need to validate if the report column name we are searching for is the same as the target file's current loop column name. So to do that, we will use again another if condition. So let's start with the report worksheet that cells again 2 for the row index, and then the column index will be our a variable, and then that value is equals to the data worksheet or that data sh that cells 1 for the row index because the column is in row number 1 of the selected file, and for the column index we will use the variable name b, and we will use again that value. Then and if the column name match, then we will look up the equivalent data of each ID number. But before we can do that, we need to declare two new counter variable. So I will just name it C and another one as D. So the C variable will be the counter variable for each row of the report worksheet. Or maybe we can name it differently so it is you can easily identify it. Report row counter, and then the other one we will just name it file row counter. And now let's write the loop for each report worksheet ID number. So again, another for loop, and we will use the report row counter variable and set the initial value equals to 3 because the first ID number is in row number 3. And the loop should be until the worksheet's last row number with value. And to get that, we will use the report sh that range a1 that current region that rows that count, and then next report row counter. So this line of code will return us the last row number with value in range A1. Well, we can actually test that using this part of the code. I will copy that, use the immediate window, and then here you will see that it returns 12 because that is the last row number in my report worksheet that has a ID number. Next, we will write the loop for each row of the file worksheets. So let's write another for loop and then use the file row counter variable, and we will set the initial value equals to 2 because the first data is in row number 2, and the end of the loop should be the data sh that range a1 that current region that rows that count. So next file row counter, we can also test this code, make sure that the target file is the active one, and then here we can see that it returns 11 because that is the last row with value in this active worksheet. All right, and next Using the reference column index, we need to validate if the report ID number is the same as the file ID number. So to do that, we will use an if condition. So if report sh.range A and concatenate the loop variable for report worksheet, which is the report row counter variable, and use that value, and we will compare that to data sh that cells. And for the cells, for the row index, we will use the file row counter variable. And for the column index, let me just expand it a bit more. For the column index, we will use the variable that represent the uh, reference column index. So reference column index, and use that value to compare. And then I think we need to extend it a bit more. And let's close the condition. So if the data or if the ID number match, then we need to copy the file data value to the report worksheet. And to do that, we will use report sh that cells um, report row counter, and the column index is the A variable, that value, and that will be equals to data sh that cells file row counter variable, and the column index is the B variable or B counter variable, and then we'll use that value, and we will add exit 4 if we found the matching ID number. And we also need to make sure to close the target workbook file after the data lookup. So we will place that here. So I will just add a comment, close the file, and we will use the file workbook variable, that is the data wb, that close, and we will indicate false for save changes. And we can also add a message box to inform the user that the upload is successful. So let's use a message box. Let's say upload is successful. And then we will use a information icon. That's maybe okay only button. And then for the message box title, I will just use report. And now we can test our code. So let me close this file first. And then let's assign the macro to our upload file shape button. So right click, assign macro, select the procedure, hit OK. And now let's click this, select the customer name file. And we can see that the first name and last name columns are now populated. Before we proceed, let's verify if the data captured is correct. So here is the column name workbook. And for 10393 ID number, that is this number, we can see that the first name is James and Bat, and that is captured correctly. The second one is 12321, and that is Josephine Darak J, and that is also captured correctly. So now we can also upload the other file. Let's try the customer contact information. We can see that we have now the contact information of these ID numbers. And lastly is the company details. Let's select that. And now we also have the company details, and this complete our summary report. Another thing, if you don't want to see what is happening in the backend, like how VBA is opening the file, we can add a code to turn off the screen update of the Excel. So let's go back to VBA editor, and we will place that code before the workbooks that open. And where is our workbook that open? Okay, here We can say application that screen updating is equals to false, and then we can set that back to true after the file is closed. So here, set it back to true. So now let me just manually delete the data. Let's upload the file again, select the customer name. That one is a bit faster compared to the first one. Let's try the other data, company details, and the last one is the customer contact information. And that is our VBA for creating a summary report using different Excel file. And I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you do, please hit that like button and also subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I would like to thank someone who gave me this scenario. So if you want me to cover any topic or if you have any questions, please put that in the comment section of this video and I will be happy to do that or answer that for you. And that is all for this video. I'll see you again in the next VBA video.